Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 12 of the Happy Poly Day series. Today, I'm joined by Claire, who runs Poly Pages, and we're going to be talking about polyamory and abuse. So, Claire, tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do on your platform.
Hi, I'm Claire. I started Poly Pages as a podcast actually a number of years ago, and since then it's grown into like a larger platform. We specifically kind of are at the intersection between the literature on polyamory and the conversations about polyamory. So our tagline is reading the texts that have shaped our community and culture. So our podcast goes chapter by chapter in the ethical slut, like the great Bible of non-monogamy, of course, and that's coming back in 2022. We run events specifically about critical conversations around polyamory, and we run a book club. So we have like an international book club with the partnership of Thorntree Press, which is a very big publisher of non-monogamous literature in this kind of space. And yeah, apart from that, I make a bunch of like TikToks of me and videos, kind of making those conversations bite-sized. But yeah, that's the platform. And we've worked together for like a while now, so this is great. I'm excited. Happy Polymus.
It was great. It's great to collaborate with you for Polyamory Day, which was a couple of weeks back, and also I remember attending the abuse and polyamory workshop that you did, and that was just really incredible work that you guys are doing. So so today, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, I guess, your polyamory origin story. Like, how did you come across polyamory? How long have you been practicing polyamory? And I understand as well that you're like solo polyamorous and a relationship anarchist. And I guess like I want to find out more about your journey to non-monogamy, and then your journey to like specifically solo polyamory. Like what that process was like. Kind of what's your story?
Let's do it. I love, by the way, that we call it this like polyamorous origin story. It makes it sound so much cooler than it is, right? Like it's when I gained my superpowers of conversion. So I'm actually the same age as the word polyamory. It's a fun fact I found out yesterday. Polyamory was coined in 1990, which is the year I was born, and so the language, like I didn't know about until sort of in my 20s. I'm now in my 30s. And so for most of my teenage years, I was just kind of living relationships that felt good to me at the time. But looking back, I'm like, oh, they were very informed by this way of thinking about love, right? I had like super intimate friendship groups, and we were all very much like swapping and changing partners a lot. I had multiple crushes at the same time, like all the early indicators, right? Like looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that's because I was polyamorous. But I really found the language for it kind of in my early 20s when my job, I'm a humanitarian aid worker, so I travel a lot. My job kind of made like monogamy just logistically insane.
Impractical.
Like, like come on, you don't know if I'm where I am half the time, you don't know if I'm okay. I have needs, and I'm stressed, and I'm in a camp for like 6 weeks. Like, it's mental. So I started to introduce that understanding of like non-monogamous relationships, then things like don't ask, don't tell, things like 100-mile rule, all these different like various options that you can have, different types of agreements. And then I was like, oh, this is really working for me actually. I'm probably gonna keep this up. So I'm definitely from like the long distance to polyamory pipeline. And then I've been having this affinity with solo polyamory for a really long time. It's been over 8 years that I've been doing this now. And in 2019, I keep saying last year, but it's not last year.
It doesn't. I make the same mistake.
I'm so confused. In the before times, I had three serious relationships, nesting partners, and I was happily bouncing between them. And I thought, oh, maybe like, I think even in podcasting at the time, it was like, maybe this is when I start nesting. No. COVID came and was like, yeah, you're single now.
Oh God.
So I had to deal with like 3 breakups in the space of about 6 months. It was really hard. It just kind of reinforced for me that the person that I will always be in the relationship with the most is myself. And that for me is what solo polyamory means. And relationship anarchy, I think of as a kind of a separate understanding of what relationships is aside from polyamory. It's quite compatible with polyamory. So people that don't know, relationship anarchy is the application of anarchist principles into intimate relationships. So it's kind of taking that like, can I swear?
Yeah.
Okay, it's kind of taking that like fuck the system approach and putting it like directly in like your friendships and your loves and your everything, and being like, there are no boundaries, we decide what we do. And for me that's always been I mean, it rings true, right? Because I'm like such a radical lefty commie, of course. Right, like of course I'm gonna be like, yeah, I don't want people telling me what I can and can't do. That's essentially my whole thing. So yeah, I've been using the term relationship anarchist. I ran a boot camp at Polyamory Day, which I definitely forgot to plug at the top of this, so thank you. You can still get an access pass for that as well until the end of the year.
Yeah, and I know that you're going to be doing another kind of polyamory day in April 2022. Yeah, Roy did the shouting out when we did our talk, so we got you covered.
Good, he's so organized. Yeah, and we're looking for speakers as well. Like, so people are listening to this or watching this, and they're like in the UK and Ireland, and they have a topic that they want to see or they want to present a workshop. We now have a place on our website to like send us your pitch, because I think it needs to be community driven, right? All my values are like really community driven. So yeah.
And I guess like you know, so you said that kind of polyamory has, you know, pretty much kind of come fairly naturally to you, but I wonder if there were any kind of struggles that you had like earlier on in your non-monogamous journey. You know, was there anything that you found particularly challenging? Because, you know, like I think there's this misconception that like, you know, once you apply like theory to practice, everything's just going to go, you know, everything's just going to be fine and dandy. And it's like, no, that's often not the case. You know, we've all made
that's
mistakes.
Never the case.
Yeah,
if
exactly.
You speak to any theoretical physicist and they'll be like, I don't know why it doesn't work in reality, like every time. Like, we don't know. So I mean, everyone makes mistakes, right? Like all relationships are messy. And what I really struggled with in those early days was I kind of had this idea that I had to be not the one, because I always realized how toxic that was, but like the best. I had to be the main character in someone else's life.
Right.
Which meant that I was like, you know, then that comes with a plethora of issues. Like rejection becomes really hard because you're like, wait, but like that's not part of my narrative vision, right? Like, you can't reject me. And also like if they find someone else who's really great, I have to constantly be like, okay, but how am I better? A lot of this kind of stuff is going on, even though I've always been I mean, I've never say that to somebody else. This was always an internal thing, right? But I had to definitely work through that. And I, you know, it's just time and age has rubbed that off me, where it's like, actually, you know, this whole framework that women see themselves in, even though I'm doing this in like a counterculture way, it's still there, and it's still like trying to produce shame and guilt, which are not natural, right? They are produced by our society, so that things and people can like sell me stuff, and I don't like being sold to. So I definitely struggle with that like a lot. And I think it's kind of like I think maybe people that are socially reared women, like they have this mindset, right? More than I mean, we should get Polyman answers to come on, like give his take on that, because I don't know if there's a male equivalent or a non-binary equivalent, but that was definitely like my thing to work through. And I think now in kind of the later stages, it's keeping my shit private, right? Like I don't know if people like know this, but like we get so many calls about being on TV, about being in the news and all those kind of things, and I think if this had happened maybe like even just 5 years ago, I would have like done those things. And now I'm having to be like, no, Claire, like in this, that's not good for you, like don't do that. Because it's obviously like that is selling my whole personal and inner life, right?
Yes.
No, I've
doesn't
sit with my my anti-capitalist principles. So.
Yeah, like I've definitely gone on multiple kind of invitations on the media, kind of do profiling on like my life and my partners and that kind of thing. And I'm very fortunate that like my because I'm very open about my life, but then my partners are very much not. And it was my partners actually who held me back and went like, this is not a good idea. You know this, right? And right. They were the ones who were like, like I very much kind of want my privacy and I don't kind of want that to be like blown. And also because, there's complications regarding like polyamory not necessarily being protected under the law. And, they didn't kind of want to risk like employment opportunities and that kind of thing. And so yeah, it's just me risking my employment, my future prospects alone. I jest, but like but yeah, like I make a point now like to not kind of show my partners on my platform because polyphilia is very much my own thing. And I think like the moment I start mixing the personal and the professional, it kind of gets a bit fucky, because I don't want my relationship to turn into my business. I don't want to kind of have to sell my relationship for the views. We kind of saw that with I don't know if you were ever following the trifecta love triad on TikTok. But yeah, so they were a triad. They were together for about 3 years, and towards the end of their relationship, like it very much became clear that like they were only together for the likes and like the comments, and they did a lot of like they put a polyamorous twist on a lot of the straight monogamous prank videos that you see on TikTok, which was amusing, but then it was very much like, what are you doing? Like, what are you guys doing?
It's like, that's the worst part of straight talk.
I know,
I know, pranks.
I know.
I don't know if anyone was like
that. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's told like monogamous heteronormative people, but you are meant to actually like the person you're with. Like,
yeah, I would never prank my partner. Like we hate surprises. It's the worst, and so I don't understand it. But yeah, like what ended up happening was like the two women left the guy, and so he lost his wife, his girlfriend, and his business like in the same day. Right. and that was devastating to watch, and I was just watching all that fall apart and go, and I was just thinking like, oh my god, I like that is I don't want that to happen to me,
right.
So yeah, like like I'm relatively kind of private on the details of my partners, but I'm just kind of open about like how I live my life, and I think that you take a fairly similar approach, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, this idea of like making the brand the relationship the brand is not new. And maybe this is how we segue out of like a discussion about us, actually, because it's like this has been happening since some of the earliest books about polyamory, the earliest blogs about polyamory, which makes sense, right? Because polyamory is about your intimate personal relationships. So how do you have discussions about those without also sort of platforming yourself as a relationship expert, like polyamorous expert, right?
Yeah.
But that pipeline, when it's not done critically, I think is going to create like a very weird like parasocial relationship where there is a vested interest in maintaining this relationship, and I would do anything to stop it. And then that can be very attractive for people that are there really for I don't want to like tar everyone with the same brush, because this isn't the case, but like I can understand why that would be like a good incentive for someone that was like, oh, I really want like a like niche fame moment. And I can also see how it could be a place that's sort of like ripe for abuse, right? Because if you're with somebody that's in this very like public image perspective, not only are they like gonna want to have to keep that relationship how it looks for as long as possible, but also like really hard for you to like say, hey, kind of like you're not practicing what you preach. And this is one of like the very first critiques of Frank and Veaux, actually, was like, you're writing all of this stuff, but like you're not doing it. So there's got to be like a space there where it's like people are in touch with their personal lives, but also if you're making a rhetoric exclusively out of your personal experience, it's like, how much do people need to see? And it's like it's a tension, right? It is
definitely a tension, because like on the one hand, you want to talk about kind of the like polyamory and how to like practice it like correctly or like whatever in the most like ethical and considerate way, but then also recognizing that like at the end of the day we are all human beings who are flawed and make mistakes, and sometimes like we can't be our best selves like 100% of the time. And I definitely have run into this in my personal life where like I've had partners who expect much more of me because I have a platform. And so like if I'm having a moment like and I'm like I'm particularly kind of emotionally distressed one day, or like and I don't kind of communicate something too correctly, or I miss a cue, right, which is often happens often for me because I'm autistic. Then I get a lot of shit for it, because like they're like, I expected better from you, you're supposed to be this poly expert. And I'm like, I don't know if I should be kind of held to this high standard just because I have like a certain number of followers. Like at the end of the day, like I'm just I just make content on the internet. And I think that the reason why I want to have kind of these vulnerable conversations with people is because like I want us to be humanized, right? Because we're just regular ass polyamorous people.
Right.
And that's important to recognize, because like I think the more you pedestalize someone, like the more dangerous it is for everyone involved. Like right. you give the person a complex, you create this weird parasocial dynamic, you put a lot of pressure on the person, and then you give them motivation to kind of perform like certain things for their followers, and it just creates a really fucked dynamic. And I think that's kind of what happened with Franklin Veaux, in a way. Like I think that like people kind of venerated him in that sense, and then so he kind of like took advantage of that until like the persona that he was putting on completely just did not match like who he was in his personal life.
Yeah. And of course it would be someone that's like a narcissist, because that sounds terrible to somebody that's not a narcissist. It sounds really great to someone that is. And I know that I shouldn't be so loose actually with throwing around the term narcissist, because it's a genuine like personality disorder. But this is kind of textbook the seeking out of grandeur and like the kind of keep it at all costs mentality. And that's fueled by like these cultural things that we have. Like if we're not able to be messy and wrong, then not just as individuals, but also like, what does that say about polyamory as a whole? Right. That's obviously not the case with polyamory. Like polyamory is about people and how they relate to each other, and most of the time we don't do great, right? Because we don't live inside each other's heads. But there is this toxic positivity culture where it's like the polyamory needs to look shiny and fun, and if it's hard, just the right amount of hard, like in the way that will align with like your spiritual awakening and anti-capitalist agendas. Because that makes it liberal and like therefore we think accessible, and we have this like particular sheen on it, which is never going to do justice to like all the times people fail and do it wrong and miscommunicate, and the million tiny paper cuts that kind of happen. I mean, can you imagine if that was the same with monogamy? Like for 1 second, can you imagine if it was like, well, monogamy is great, it's just really hard but totally worth it? I mean, that would just be so weird.
No, I definitely want to talk about the toxic positivity thing more, because this is something that massively grates on me as well. Like this whole thing where it's like, oh, if you're feeling jealousy, you just have to read this book and work through it. It's in the and also that like there's this expectation that once you've read the books and you've read the blogs and listened to the podcasts, that like you step into kind of actively practicing polyamory and everything must be 100% perfect, and you must be 100% ethical from day one. And I think that's quite a lot of pressure to put on people. It doesn't kind of give them room to make mistakes, in the same way that monogamous people are allowed to make mistakes all the time, and they don't get like the monogamy label stripped away from them. So then I feel that it's a disservice to the polyamorous community that we are holding ourselves to like a higher standard, not only because like it creates like a lot of pressure for those who like are holding themselves to kind of this ideal of having to be their best selves all of the time, but also for people who are struggling or they're having a bad time, they feel like they can't talk about it, because then it's like, oh, but we can't talk about that now, because otherwise the monogamous people are going to think that polyamory is toxic, so we can't talk about it. And then you just create this thing where people are gaslighting themselves, or
other people are gaslighting them,
exactly,
because there isn't discussion. I always say when you make a culture where it's difficult to talk about certain things, you make a culture where abuse becomes invisible, and that can happen to anyone. And any relationship anywhere in the world. Generally the not being able to speak about things is part of an enabling culture.
Yeah, for sure.
All the time.
Yeah.
And I often have a hot take, by the way, which I put on TikTok like so many times and it always gets taken down, where it's like, if you're cheating on your partner, you could still be polyamorous. Like, you're not expected to do polyamory perfectly in order to be polyamorous, right? Islam would be like, well, if you cheated on your partner, that means you cannot be monogamous. It's impossible. It's like so many messy things that we are like, oh, this just doesn't happen in our community, or if it does, then that means that you're not part of the community.
It's a one true Scotsman thing, you know. It's like it wasn't applied correctly and therefore it is not that. And you know, it's difficult because like I think polyamory was born out of this idea that, you know, it's the ethical way to do things, and so like, you know, goodness and ethics is kind of baked into like the history of like what polyamory is. And now I think we're distancing ourselves from it more and just kind of seeing it as like, you know, a practice that can be done rightly or wrongly, but in the same way that monogamy is, right? You know, people fail at monogamy all the time. And you know, it's about the double standard again. So kind of let's get into the meat of like what we wanted to talk about today, which is, you know, polyamory, like, and abuse. And I think, you know, we've already touched on some aspects of it, how like toxic positivity culture kind of contributes to, you know, like abuse being perpetuated, and how kind of Franklin Veaux, you know, used like, you know, abused his platform and like so many of his partners, while kind of being, you know, this kind of pedestalized figure like in the polyamorous community. And obviously, you know,
and still is, by the way,
and still is
like really
you're completely correct. Yeah,
which I think is like the next thing that really we need to talk about, which is like, we seem to be like terrified of calling out people when we know they're doing shitty stuff.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I think that's part of this as well, right? Like, if we did that, we wouldn't be playing by the unwritten rules that polyamory is not toxic, right? Because we're pointing out toxic people. But that's kind of the job of the people that live in the house, is to point out the missing stair, right? That's where that comes from. So Polypages has always taken a very vocal stance on believing survivors and calling out people. It hasn't always been popular, but I'd rather be unpopular for that than I mean, going to be unpopular to some people, right? Like,
exactly. You know, I think being content creators, you just have to like accept that like you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and so you may as well just do whatever the fuck you want.
right
yeah
we have this weird thing in this particular subculture where it's like, we don't want to be accused of gatekeeping. And I think precisely because we're moving away from like this, as you point out, like the ethical model of like, this is how you should do polyamory, and moving more into like this is an identity or a practice, and it can be done many, many ways. So who are you to say what's right and wrong? But in that kind of move, we've missed a part of this, which is that there has to still be a way by which you say, well, that's actually really shitty behavior, and this person's doing really shitty behavior regularly. This is abuse. This is an abuser. And we're also scared of being called gatekeeping, which we still get called like daily, right? Like, as content creators. We're never going to like encapsulate the full experience because it's so, you know, multifaceted. But we're like terrified of being called gatekeeping, and so we are silent, I think. And not obviously, if someone came and asked us like, oh, it's right for an abuser, we'd be like, yes, but we're not making sure that is part of an everyday conversation about polyamory in the way that would actually protect people from, you know, identifying that as a bad way of doing polyamory, as a way that was very, very harmful, and also identifying this person as someone that's problematic or harmful for the community. And you know, he's still got like a couple of thousand followers, I think, like on Quora, and like he's trying to peddle this again. But I think for Polypages, it's always been kind of a bit of a weird stance to be so strong from so young, but also like, what would be the point in not having that stance? Like, it would only serve to hide behaviors that are problematic and also protect individuals who have done harm. So we've always taken a really strong like belief survivors stance, and for sure mainlined it.
Like, I think that you know, abuse and polyamory is such an important topic because, you know, I think along with the whole toxic positivity culture thing, you know, people don't like to talk about like the dark side of polyamory. You know, there's always this idea that like it's so like, you know, freeing and love is abundant and you know, it's all sunshine and rainbows, and you know, like the reality of it is, well, you're having multiple relationships, and that's hard. And definitely, like, when you know, speaking kind of from my own experiences, you know, like I wouldn't say an abusive relationship, but I was definitely in an unhealthy and toxic like polyamorous dynamic, you know, a couple of years ago. And I remember at the time that, you know, there were a couple of reasons why, like, I felt that it was more difficult for me to kind of reach out and get support, you know, compared to like if I was in a monogamous relationship. So firstly, you know, there's like the whole toxic positivity thing that we already addressed. You know, I felt that I couldn't kind of smash the veneer that other people had so kind of carefully crafted, you know, of like what polyamorous relationships looked like. There was also, like, you know, like the gaslighting that came with that. You know, like I often kind of saw it as like an internal issue, you know, like maybe it was my own insecurities, maybe it was my own trauma, and you know, it was just something that I had to work through, because polyamory is supposed to be difficult, right? You know, in the early stages you're going to struggle a little bit, and you know, at no point did I ever kind of think that maybe, you know, it was my partner that was the problem, it was our relationship that was the problem. It was always just like, you know, I have to work through this hard thing because, you know, I'm trying to reach enlightenment or something. And then there was also the additional pressure of you know, like the fact that I was living like a non-normative life, right? And then I felt that I needed to prove a point to people, that polyamory did work, that open relationships did work, and that if and so I didn't want to tell people about you know, me like struggling, or like, you know, being really upset all the time, or being really stressed all the time, because then, you know, I would be proving the haters right. You know, I'd be proving, like, validating their opinions that like polyamory was toxic and unhealthy, and that, you know, I was just being taken advantage of, even though that very much was the case for me at the time. And of course, you know, a lot of people don't understand what open relationships and polyamory and all that kind of stuff is. So then it was difficult to reach out and get support for that, because people would be, you know, just pointing at polyamory as the issue rather than, you know, like the person or like the kind of relationship dynamic. So then there were like so many barriers at the time, that kind of made it difficult for me to reach out and like talk to people. And it really wasn't until like I got out of it where I was like, that was silly, that was so completely stupid, and I should have, you know, spoken out about it more, and I should have, you know, not doubted myself as much, you know, because like there is a difference between, you know, like regular kind of insecurities, like, you know, like, you know, fucking with your jealousy, and then there's like distress, and like the dysregulation that can occur, like if, you know, your needs aren't being met, or your partner is like you know, consistently neglecting you, or doing all kinds of horrible things, you know. So like I think it's important to address like the dark side of polyamory, and you know, I try to bring light to it, like on my platform, you know, as much as I like kind of making funny memes and stuff. Like I also like want to talk about like how, you know, certain practices can be very harmful, and you know, and like, you know, things like triangulation and polycules, like things like you know, like if you do like a don't ask don't tell arrangement for the wrong reasons, you know, if you kind of try to like appease all your partners at the same time, and in doing so disappoint everyone at the same time because everyone has conflicting needs, like, you know, there's so many dynamics when it comes to kind of like just any arrangement with multiple people, because everyone like has their own perspectives, everyone's kind of living in their own heads, and it's difficult to kind of get everything out in the open and to communicate effectively.
Right.
Yeah,
I think it's important to draw the distinction between abuse and bad behavior, right?
yeah,
because there is a kind of we need to stop like a snowball effect from these conversations, because you might do something that harms somebody, you might do something that's you know, not agreed on, dishonest, for example, not like spreading yourself so thin you can't meet people's needs.
yeah,
That is harmful, but it is not abuse.
yeah.
Abuse, for the record, the one that I use at least, is a pattern of harmful behaviors with the intent, design, or consequence of making someone unable to leave a relationship. This is, for me at least, at the core of what abuse is, and I think that there is a great strength in being able to be like, it's not this one behavior, and it's not this one checklist of red flags, even though we do have a checklist of red flags on our website, but like it's not just this one thing, right? It's a pattern of these things that are packaged together, and so that like for a long time the discussions about abuse, you know, didn't even include queer people, or the idea that women could abuse a man, right? They were so heteronormative.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is like, I mean, you've just said it right. It made it really hard for you to access. I mean, I imagine if you turned up to a service provider and tried to explain that you were experiencing partner abuse, because people that are in an abusive situation very rarely can see clearly the abuse, right? It's something that happens after you leave. Chances are, as you said, they'd be like, oh, it's because you're polyamorous. Or at best, that's a symptom of the abuse. At worst, it's a tool of the abuser that you're with. And I mean, to be clear, it can be, but then so can monogamy. Right. Monogamy can be used as an abusive tool or by an abuser.
For sure. Well. Yeah, like something that kind of related to that, actually, since you brought it up. Like I find that, you know, in terms of the differences between how monogamy can be used as a tool for abuse and how polyamory can be used as a tool for abuse, I find that in monogamy, it's often like it's more common for like an abuser to use monogamy as a way to kind of, you know, control and restrict someone's behavior, right? You know, like kind of like being very possessive over them, kind of controlling their time, etc., etc. Whereas like in polyamory, like I think how that often that manifests itself as like neglect, you know, someone enjoying their autonomy and freedom so much that like they don't care about the people around them and they just do whatever they want because they think that they don't need to take any responsibility. You know, your feelings are not my responsibility, but like taken to the extreme.
Also you've heard, like, there is also this, so yes, that could definitely be it, but it could also be like, well, we're polyamorous, so you have to be polyamorous, which means I'm expecting you to be accessible to me in these ways at this time. I'm expecting my partners to have access to you in these ways at this time. I'm expecting you to do things that I want, in the same way that monogamy could be used to ask somebody to perform their relationship in a certain way. Polyamory can do it as well. So I think absolutely. It could be like, oh, I'm polyamorous, so I'm going to do what I want, but it could, and you know, used in this way, but it could also be used in a way where it's like, this is what you signed up for, so you need to get with the program. And I think we see that in unicorn hunting quite a lot, where it's like, this is the goal, so you need to do these things. Because we need you to perform this in this relationship in a certain way, which essentially is you know, obviously dehumanizing, but eventually, if done with like a package of other harmful behaviors, can make it very hard to leave the relationship. And there are comprehensive models of what that looks like and how those things will come together. But again, they are not poly-informed. And that was the issue that we were running into at the beginning of this year. There was like literally no resources on what partner abuse and polyamory would look like. Like none. So could you tell me more about how like abuse can be, you know, perpetuated specifically in polyamorous dynamics that, you know, in ways that you kind of don't see crop up in monogamy? Yeah, I definitely can. Although before I start that, it's like important to say that a lot of the abuse is the same. It's the same behavior. It's applied in different ways, right? Sure. The issue is that if the service provider or the theory is not poly-informed, then it becomes invisible. Not because it's not there, but because it's not monogamous. So for example, gaslighting, right, is one of the tools of psychological abuse. And you kind of could point at gaslighting and be like, oh, that's gaslighting, and it doesn't really matter if 7 people are gaslighting one person or one person's gaslighting 7 people, like, you know what it is. But because there's no formal adaptation of a model of abuse, the issue is not necessarily that the abuse is happening in specific or different ways in polyamory, although there are some, which I'll go over in a second. It's more that the understandings of those abusive relationships are not being captured by the polyamorous experience. Completely. So for example, the Duluth Wheeler parent control, I think, is one of the best understandings of how parent control is used to maintain someone being in a relationship, which is abuse. And they have always had this quadrant on this wheel, which is called male privilege. Just male privilege. And I was like, yes, but we need to update this. Like, my abusive relationship was between 2 cis women, me and another woman. So like obviously these things are still happening, but without the gendered lens, or with a different gendered lens. So in our adaptation, for example, we included couples privilege in that. Okay. Right? Yeah, of course. So for one that would come up in polyamory would be using couples privilege to implement change or introduce partner rules. So for example, introducing, changing or implementing a veto rule without the say of the person that's not in the original couple. And this is a really common one, I think, right? Shall I keep going on these? Actually,
Please.
So for example, emotional abuse is sometimes thought of as, I mean, again, it's a whole package of behaviors in emotional abuse, but we have things like using a nickname you don't like in public and private is always being thought of as like one of these red flag examples, right? But you can very clearly apply this to a polyamorous lens, right? Where it's like you're being compared to your other partners in public or private. This is emotional abuse.
You want to kind of, I think there can be a competitiveness that can be exploited, like between metamors, right? Like where, you know, you want to be like the good partner that doesn't cause like your hinge trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Another good example is like emotional abuse is thought of as making someone feel guilty, right? Constantly making someone feel guilty, right? And we see this in a lot of the literature about abuse. It's very, very common and very, very harmful because it does like this very deep, almost irreparable wound about what is okay for you to do and not do, which takes years and very long time to recover. If we put a polyamorous lens on this, it's making them feel guilty about the polyamory or about the role that they want in the polyamory, whether or not this person is actively doing polyamory. But if you are a monogamous provider, or if you're providing monogamous centric or mononormative services for abuse, then you're gonna be like, well, of course people should feel guilty about wanting to have sex with people. Like, of course they should. But that can again be used in this way where it's used as a tool of emotional abuse, which is part of this big wheel of other spokes, right, in this wheel.
Absolutely.
Threats and coercion is another area of the wheel. So obviously this is things like intimidating somebody in a relationship, making them do illegal things, all of which can still happen in any type of relationship. But if you apply a polyamorous lens, then you get more specific things like intimidating a metamor to leave a hinge partner.
Or even, you know, two people kind of intimidate, you know, a couple intimidating a third by going like, you know, you follow our rules or you leave. And I think that kind of adds, you know, almost like a, you know, peer pressure, like a group kind of pressure dynamic to it that kind of makes it even more difficult for someone to say no.
Exactly. I've actually literally written down threats to leave or expel a secondary from the home. So yeah, you're getting it. It's like these are not separate behaviors that are happening, but they have to, we're not capturing the unique ways that they present when there's more individuals in this.
Of course.
So we've also got using children. Use of children is sort of as being, again, this is very mono heteronormative, right? So the idea that this comes from an understanding of like a battered wife in a home, right? Not like, but for example, when there is pressure to conform to the polycules family planning or birth spacing, that would be an example of the use of children that's informed by polyamory, or demands to disclose your family planning information. Like no one should be having to tell anyone what their family planning or birth control looks like, right? That's not something you're entitled to because you're in a polycule or in a polygamous marriage or whatever. Intimidation is also a very large part of this wheel, which is obviously slightly different from threats and coercion, in that they can include things like smashing and destroying items, glances, gestures, the introduction of the object of violence, so introducing like a gun or a knife into the home. In polyamory, we're looking at things like specifically targeting items and things that have sentimental value in other relationships, displaying jealousy and then using that to justify intimidation, or intimidating people that you are not in the relationship with, like your hinge partners or your metamors.
Definitely.
So that's just the first 5. So we're going to do the rest of them as well because we're here now. Why not?
Why not? Because I really like this kind of reinventing like this kind of traditional model, because it is a good model, but it just hasn't been adapted to kind of, you know, polyamorous dynamics. So yeah, do please continue.
Yeah, I mean, it was only 10 years ago that they included gender like the opposite way.
Oh really?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like, and now, you know, you and I are on TikTok where it's like, I have no gender, like fuck gender binary, like gender in this economy. So it's like, it's so it's so behind the times that it definitely needs a revision. And again, I have to stress, this is not like a officiated version of this. This is a project that we've done with some stakeholders that were not the Duluth Wheel of Parent Control. So economic abuse is another area of abuse. Again, these all work together and are kind of ringed by physical or sexual violence, which we won't go into for various reasons. But the economic abuse, was originally was thought of as being like giving a woman an allowance, giving somebody, taking away someone's ability to work. This was thought of as economic abuse in days of old. Now we could think about it as being like pressuring somebody to buy into a polycule or a commune, threatening to keep your unicorn or your third off of the household income or address, which thereby economically impacts them, threatening to out somebody, or to their landlord, so they would like lose their place of work, for example.
No, and I think like in heteronormative dynamics, right, like there isn't that extra kind of societal thing, like if you're in a queer dynamic or if you're in a polyamorous dynamic, then there is like the pressure of being like outed, and you can kind of weaponize that, whereas like in a straight relationship, like that wouldn't be the case.
Right. Absolutely. And as I said, it was only about 10 years ago they began to introduce the traditional relationships. And that was when the idea that outing somebody could be weaponized as abuse really first got brought up. And that, that was like 20 years of the gay community being like, this is a problem, before they were like, okay, we'll include it. So the last two are isolation and minimizing, denying, and blaming. So isolation was always thought of as being one of the very first steps in abuse, in that you basically make it so this person doesn't feel like they can just talk about the relationship with other people, maybe physically moving locations so that they're away from family and friends, demanding to see messages, telling what they can wear, what they can read, etc. All of which can still happen in polyamory. But when we add a polyamorous lens, it's like controlling how and what you say to other partners becomes part of that. It becomes less about the isolation, but more about the feeling of isolation, right? Less about physically isolating. Using veto power can also be an example of this, right? If you're using veto power, you essentially have a say over what the person is saying and doing with other people, and can isolate them very easily. Calling other partners during an argument.
Or leaving, to go on a date with someone else, like, while you're fighting, you're just like, oh, I can't deal with you. I'm gonna kind of spend time with whoever.
So we've included this, and I think this is one of the most contested areas actually when we were revising it, because polyamory is sort of like almost by definition less likely to be alone, but the feeling of isolation is really the key, right? That's really the thing that you're cultivating with these actions and behaviors, because if someone feels alone, they feel dependent on you, and if they are dependent on you, they cannot leave. So this is like the mindset. And the final one is minimizing, denying, and blaming. We've already spoken about gaslighting, but I think there's some really important things that need to be incorporated into this area of the model. Specifically, making light of abuse has always been included, but claims of mutual abuse have never been formally included in this. And it's very important to note that mutual abuse doesn't exist. That's not a myth. It's not real. And it is a myth that is used by abusers to kind of justify or deflect from what they are doing. Davo, deny, reverse victim offender role. And this is, we see so much in polyamory, because we are a small community that kind of knows everyone else's business. So it becomes really hard for us to unpick accusations of mutual abuse. Luckily, when we were working with the network I read, it was very insightful, because they have a screening tool for service providers to precisely unpick this and figure out what the initial, like the initiant of that is. And I think that's really, really important, because if we need to be very clear that this myth of mutual abuse, it is part of the wheel of power and control, right? It's part of the way that we think about abuse, not an actual genuine accusation. So that's a little smorgasbord of what we've got here. And I think it's really important to say that obviously each one of these things is not abuse, but that is why we define abuse as a pattern of behaviors and actions, because it cannot be this one thing.
Yeah. And in any case, like, even if, like, you know, someone doesn't kind of check enough of the tick boxes for something to qualify as abuse, you know, it's still kind of toxic behavior that should be kind of called out, right? And I think a lot of this stuff kind of gets brushed under the carpet for all the reasons that we mentioned already, right? You know, like you know, I think like one of the greatest disservices that the polyamorous community has done is kind of seeing jealousy as purely an internal issue. I think like that is a problem that, like, I think really plagues the community.
From the pen,
yeah,
literally from the pen of Franklin Veaux.
Yeah,
that literally was his use.
Yeah, because, you know, it completely ignores that, like, jealousy can be caused by external factors. And actually, you know, now that we're on the topic, actually, because, you know, More Than Two as a book, like, it was a very formative text for a lot of people. It was definitely a very formative text for me, like, early on in my polyamory journey. You know, everyone read The Ethical Slut and More Than Two, like, those were the two kind of most recommended books, right? And you know, I do think that, like, More Than Two, like, has kind of, like, you know, has like valuable, like, you know, bits in it. Like, at the end of the day, like, the subtitle to More Than Two was like a practical guide to polyamory, and I do think that it did serve its purpose for, you know, quite a lot of that. You know, I learned a lot of really useful things from that book. But, you know, like, I don't know if anyone's actually ever done like a critical reading of More Than Two in terms of like what it got wrong and what kind of toxic beliefs it perpetuated that still exist in the community today. And I, you know, one of those things is, like, you know, the framing of jealousy as like purely like an internal issue. You know, you have to like work on yourself and process it, and then, you know, no one can help you. And I think another one is like the, you know, the emotional libertarianism idea, like, you know, the, like, your feelings are not my responsibility, and that kind of being taken to its extreme, going like, oh, you know, I kind of didn't cause your feelings of jealousy or whatever, so therefore it's not kind of my issue to deal with. And I was wondering if you had any more thoughts on, you know, kind of what More Than Two got wrong and kind of what people should look out for if they ever should kind of return to that text.
So the text itself, the survivors have always been very clear that they believe it does have a lot of value. There's still got very important ideas, and is really, you know, it's not just a historical artifact, it is meant to be, you know, pragmatic. I think that I know that the survivors have always just requested that if this book is recommended, it is with the addendum that of Franklin Veaux's personal life, because what was written, and this is like one of the very first critiques. There's a great documentary about Franklin Veaux's abuse, actually, which is basically just a dramatized retelling of the hours and hours of interviews that were done by Louisa Leonidas.
Leontides, yeah.
It's really hard to say.
yeah. Leontides, yeah. we know. I know who you mean.
We know. Yeah. But if you Google the polyamorous parasite, you'll actually find out. And it's only about an hour long. And, you know, one of the very first critiques that comes out was like, this guy is writing a bunch of stuff, but is he actually doing it? No. So I think when you read it, you just have to have that lens, right? That this is being written by somebody that wasn't practicing this. This is kind of like a theory that would have been good to practice. And it's also worth noting that, like, a lot of that editing work and a lot of that writing work was done by Eve, the co-author. So I think it still has like an awful lot to give, and maybe we should do a critical reading for season 2, Poly Papers. Yeah. That would be fun. Yeah. I just think it needs to be added with the addendum that this wasn't practiced, and also that his other books, like The Game Changer, for example, the survivors have asked to not read this book because it's his first person narrative, essentially, version of like the relationships, and is a tool itself of minimizing and denying and shifting the blame for his abuse. So it's basically a manifesto of gaslighting, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Which is why I would never recommend the Game Changer or any of Franklin Veaux's other texts. There are now so many people making, you know, new content. There's new ways of delivering knowledge. So there's a lot more podcasts out there. The Multiamory podcast is, I think, probably the gold standard of like, how to. There's a lot of documentary that's being made by our community, like poly role models or the normalizing non-monogamy projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's so much new stuff out there. And as you say, I don't think that many people are coming here because of the book they read. I think they're reading the book because they're here.
Yeah.
It's this chicken and egg situation, but I'm pretty sure it was the egg. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure people arrived and was like, maybe we should read about this. So for me, it's more important that we're having these discussions that are informed by a knowledge of what has happened, and especially when we're talking about abuse, the more than two is not a case study of abuse. The Game Changer might be, but more than two isn't.
Yes.
And the discussions that we are, like, since we started running knowledge making dissemination about abuse and polyamory, we are seeing a sort of blooming of discussion in this topic. I think what needs to be done is we need to be linking it back to the theory and the resources about abuse that already exist, as Polypages did with this Duluth Wheel of Power and Control, but there's many other connections that need to be made.
Absolutely. No, I think you're doing really important work in this space, kind of bringing light to, Franklin Veaux, but also just, abuse and polyamory in general, like yourself and the people who joined you for the abuse and polyamory workshop. So Rickert, obviously, Polyamorous Black Girl, and Sydney Rachin. And like Polyamorous Black Girl is doing like a incredible video series right now, like on TikTok, about,
and more importantly, has a workshop on abuse and polyamory. I think it's really important to plug that as well. I mean, bless Alicia's heart, she wrote this whole thing and then her laptop got stolen. She had to rewrite it from scratch. Can you even imagine?
I would cry. I would cry.
I want to do it. I would not have done it. I'm telling you right now, I would have been like, okay, I'm getting a ghostwriter. Like, I wouldn't have done it. I just couldn't have put myself through it twice. Like, especially as someone who's publicly a survivor, we have this issue with abuse generally, where like the burden is on the survivors. The call out is on the survivors, and more often than not, the call out doesn't work, and they just end up with a huge smear campaign, and it wrecks people's lives, and it's really harmful, right? So to be going through all of that and still be making something for the community, I think it's really important to kind of give extra props to Alicia for that, because absolutely, it cannot be like personally easy. And I think the only other thing to say is that we have been working to figure out a way to do events because we run events regularly. We've been working out ways to make those safer and to make sure that they actually put into practice the Believe Survivor stance that we have. And so we had during Polyamory Days, we had like this package of interventions that were specifically to alleviate that burden, right? Anyone can report anyone. And it might seem like, the floodgates are open, but we thought we should try it to see what would happen if it wasn't like you yourself have to have been harmed in order to out this person. What if it was like someone that's completely outside the situation could have heard something and then reported it? Or what if it's someone that saw somebody doing harm or heard about someone that saw someone doing harm? Like, at what degree do we allow it? So we put the marker way back and kind of open the floodgates to try and see, like, would this still be actionable? And then we'll like work in from there. And that was like there was kind of like a behind the scenes thing that was happening with Polyamory Day, was to see if we can do this. And then with the next Polyamory Day, we'll be writing like a report on it, and including like what we're going to do differently. We're thinking about introducing vetting, which is something that's already done in the kink community, but we don't necessarily do it in polyamory, formally at any rate. So there's now lots of stuff's happening, right? There's lots of workshops, there's lots of thought projects, there's lots of like trials being run, but that only happens if we keep the conversation relevant and moving.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting. You're almost kind of doing a little social experiment, like through Polyamory Day, that none of us even knew about. It's just like, right. Sneaky. No, that's super cool.
Well, because the other big polyamory conferences of the UK have traditionally been marred with, if not actual abusers in the committee, then people that are very closely associated with them. Right. And again, like, we don't want to be called gatekeeping, so we're not gonna talk about it. And I'm like, someone's gotta just say it, right? Like, this is not this is not to actually like make someone's life hell, it's to improve the community, right? Like that's the goal. It's not like a vindictive thing. But you still got to say it, right? You still got to be like, well, you're a known associate of a known predator in our community, so maybe you shouldn't be running the event, right?
Exactly.
Or maybe someone else should be involved, or maybe that there should be a set of common practices that we agree is the minimum standard for running events in order to keep them safe.
Yeah. And you know, like, it's honestly so, like, it was so bizarre to me, like, finding out that like Franklin Veaux had got, you know, his fingers were in so many pies that, like, you know, had reached kind of even polyamorous spaces in the UK, right? You know, like, I was so shocked to find out that kind of there were so many people in the UK who were kind of associated with him and like aiding him, you know, in his current projects. And yeah, like, I just didn't think that like his reach and his influence was that far, and it really shocked me.
I don't think I found it very shocking, because if you think about a person that would seek out a subculture in order to leverage it for their own abusive reasons, right? Not gonna let that go, right? Like, ever. I mean, eventually I suppose he'll like drop off the face of it. You know, we all think that will happen, because it's just, I don't know how you come back from such a huge blow than this. But yeah, it was a bit like, oh, you're still here, like a bad fart. Read the room and leave, like, come on.
No, it's genuinely just, like, it is honestly like a plague on our community that, like, the, you know, like the person who wrote like, you know, one of the most well-known like texts on polyamory, you know, to the point where it was literally shown in season 3, was like, right,
was you know, did such terrible things. Was so trash.
It was really trash. Well, I mean, you is generally, you know, I mean, like, in a way, I wonder if that was like a cool, you know, like a clever. I don't think the showrunners are that clever, but you know, maybe like it was saying something that it was that book in particular, since, you know, like the show is literally about like a narcissist psychopath person. So. But no, I don't think they were being that clever when they showed that book rather than any other one.
No, I think I doubt they even contacted the authors or the publisher. I'm pretty sure they just
took a
like,
book,
oh, this is a book that people they probably went for the ethical slut, and then someone was like, you can't show slut on TV, and they were like, oh, sorry, yes, the multiple murders is fine, but we couldn't possibly have the word slut on a book, that would be bad. So we'll go with this other one.
Oh my god, you know, you're so right. I think that is probably what happened, now I think about it. Oh man, oh my god. Well, this has been such an informative chat, Claire, and I'm sure that, like, you know, you're bringing light to some issues that, you know, very hard hitting, but, you know, very much needed in the community. So where can people find you on social media?
We are everywhere at Poly Pages, so POLYPAGES. I'm personally Claire L. Travers on all media. You can follow Polyamory Day. We have our own Twitter for specifically Polyamory Day, and that's at Polyamory Day. Our website, I know. Our website is www.polypages.org, and the Polyamory Day website is www.polyamoryday.co.uk. And I think that's everywhere. We're on TikTok. Poly Pages is on TikTok. I do sign language on TikTok as well in my personal capacity. And yeah, Instagram is also one of our platforms. I think that's all our platforms. Yeah. We're not on Facebook.
Do you have any events that are coming up that you'd like to plug?
Yeah, we do in the new year. We have we're kicking off our event season in the new year with one on long distance in polyamory. Talking about that pipeline that I mentioned about starting from long distance, but also the other way, how do you transition and if polyamory, like a polyamorous relationship to long distance, with Avita Sawyers, myself, and one other panelist that is not yet confirmed, so I won't say them. We also have the Poly Pages book club, which is running starting in January. We are reading Love Isn't Colorblind by Kevin A. Patterson. And we have 2 facilitators for that. We have Avita Sawyers and Krista Van Opposel. And that's gonna be great. I'm really excited to read that. We did a lot of stuff, we haven't talked about this, but we did a lot of stuff around racial and colonial implications in polyamory this year.
Yeah.
So this is like a continuation of that discussion, like come and get involved. The Poly Pages book club is, less than a cup of coffee a week in price or something. So I think it's definitely like an affordable way of like engaging with these texts in a supportive reading environment. And you get to meet the authors, which is really cool. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the work you do, Claire. And it was great to speak to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.